Hello, my dear friends. Today, I will tell you a mysterious story about the Tinker. Tinker, the clockwork genius. Part 1. The first sparks of genius. In the gentle cradle of the low rolling hills of the reticulated plateau, a land untouched by the ravages of war and far removed from the noisy engines of industry, nestled a village unlike any other in all the lands of the ancients. It was not rich nor sprawling, but it hummed with an energy that had nothing to do with mana or miracles. Here, in this place kissed each dawn by a cool, pale mist, the minds of its inhabitants burned brighter than any enchanted pyre. This was a settlement of thinkers, tinkerers, inventors, people who held the laws of nature in reverence, eschewing magic for the elegant discipline of science. Among them, one name shone with a brilliance even the elders could not have foreseen. Boush. It was early spring, when the air hummed with the promise of new possibilities. The village square, less a plaza and more an open patchwork of cobbled stones and wild flowers, was alive with the metallic clatter and high-pitched whirring of gears. Children darted between benches, chasing clockwork insects that buzzed merrily on spindly legs. Old women tinkered with weather vanes shaped like wyverns, and stooped men squinted at sundials, their hands stained oil black. But above all, at the very center, where the morning sun struck the ancient clock tower and painted its face in gold, stood Boush. He was scarcely more than a boy, 12 summers, perhaps 13, but his hand bore the scars of countless experiments, nicks from razor-thin copper wires, burns from poorly insulated coils, smudges of charcoal and ink from endless calculations. His eyes were quick and alive, pale blue with flecks of silver, as though someone had trapped lightning behind glass. At this very moment, he crouched over a low wooden table, surrounded by an audience equal parts skeptical and awed. On the table sat his first masterpiece, a clockwork automaton barely larger than a loaf of bread. Its body was forged from scraps, a tea kettle for a belly, brass tubes for limbs, a miniature wind-up key protruding from its back. 2 polished bits of obsidian served as impassive eyes. Boush wound the key with care. He looked up and caught his mother's gaze in the crowd, a mixture of pride and worry etched into every line of her face. He smiled, reassuring her as best he could. "Will it walk?" asked old Yarn, the blacksmith, his voice rumbling like thunder over gravel. "Or will it simply explode again?" A ripple of laughter swept through the crowd. Boush grinned, undaunted. "This one," he replied, his voice clear, despite its youthfulness, "will not only walk, it shall fetch." With that pronouncement, he stepped back and flipped a small switch hidden beneath the automaton's chin. There followed a tense moment, a faint whir as springs tightened within the creature's chest. And then, with a delicate click, it lurched forward on spindly legs. The crowd gasped as it tottered across the tabletop, its movements halting but purposeful, before arriving at a walnut placed at the table's edge. It extended a tiny claw crafted from bent wire and deftly snatched up the nut, holding it aloft for all to see. His younger sister, Tess, shrieked with glee. "It's working! Look, it's actually working!" Even old Jarn was forced to stifle his skepticism, his lips twitching upward in reluctant admiration. Boush's heart skipped within his chest, not out of pride in their approval, though that was sweet, but because in this instant he saw not just what was, but what could be. The gears within his mind turned ceaselessly, calculating every inefficiency in the automaton's gait, every wasted flicker of energy. Already, he imagined stronger motors, more intricate sensors, new alloys for frame and joint. The applause was thunderous, echoing between stone facades and into the open blue sky. The village elder shuffled forward, leaning heavily upon her cane. She wore spectacles so thick they distorted her eyes into enormous orbs. Her voice was soft, but carried weight. "Remarkable work, young Boush," she intoned. "But tell us, why do you pursue these mechanical wonders? Is not life simpler without them?" Boush paused, feeling every gaze upon him. He searched for words honest enough to encapsulate his passion. "I see patterns everywhere," he said quietly, "in how water flows around stones, in how leaves spiral to the ground, in how thunder travels through clouds before finding earth. Machines are my way of understanding those patterns, of making sense of the world." A hush settled over those gathered, a rare moment where even children held their breath. The elder nodded gravely. "Then pursue your craft, but let curiosity guide you with kindness." Boush bowed his head in thanks. Within him, something had shifted, a resolve solidifying like steel cooled in water. He would not simply make toys for amusement. He would unlock secrets no one else dared to dream. That night, long after torches sputtered out and only embers remained glowing along the village's main avenue, Boush sat hunched over his workbench beneath a crooked window. The moon hung swollen overhead. Shadows danced on walls lined with blueprints and diagrams pinned alongside sketches of birds' wings and mechanical claws. His father entered quietly, cautious not to break whatever spell had settled over his son. He stood for a moment in silence before clearing his throat. "It'll be dawn soon," he said gently. "You need your rest." Boush did not look up from his calculations. "If I can just adjust the weight distribution along the right foreleg, see here, the momentum is wasted on each step." He jabbed at a series of numbers scrawled on parchment. His father sighed, half exasperation, half pride, and sat beside him. "You have your mother's mind," he murmured, ruffling Boush's hair, "and her stubbornness." At last, Boush set down his stylus. He turned to face his father, a man whose hands were large and calloused from years at the loom, but whose eyes betrayed a sharpness undiminished by age. "Do you think it matters?" Boush asked suddenly, a note of vulnerability wrapping itself around his words. "All this? The machines? The experiments?" His father regarded him quietly before replying, "Everything matters if it makes you more yourself." They sat together in companionable silence while the stars wheeled over their heads. Spring bled into summer. Golden light filtered through sprawling fields where metal contraptions whirred beside stalks of wheat and barley. Under Boush's influence, the entire village became a crucible for invention. Children traded marbles for ball bearings. Elders debated over steam pressure equations instead of harvest yields. Yet Boush remained restless, inventive hunger gnawing incessantly at his insides. On one particularly misty morning, he gathered a group of friends beneath the ancient willow that marked the village's border. "I have an idea," he announced, as dew clung to their boots and birds chirped overhead. "A contest, a tournament, not for strength or speed, but for machines." They looked at him askance. Martin, a wiry boy prone to nervous fidgeting, spoke up first. "Machines? Like your walking kettle?" "No," Boush replied with a conspiratorial grin. Better. His eyes sparkled as he described his vision. Each competitor builds their own automaton, anything they can imagine. Two machines enter an arena, a ring drawn in chalk, and must outthink and outmaneuver one another until one emerges victorious. A hush fell as they considered this novel proposal. "And what if they break?" asked Tess, always quick to spot flaws. "Then we learn how to make them stronger," Boush replied simply. Within days, preparations began. Wooden boards scavenged from wrecked barrels, lengths of twine and copper wire borrowed from friendly neighbors, scraps of metal salvaged from old farm tools. Boush worked tirelessly, not only on his own design, but helping others realize their visions as well. Some built rolling contraptions bristling with spikes. Others favored delicate insect-like robots powered by twisted rubber bands. Still others devised improbable hybrids with flailing arms or spinning saws made from discarded saw blades. The first tournament drew nearly half the village to watch, the air electric with anticipation and friendly rivalry. Boush's entry was modest in appearance, squat and compact, its frame reinforced against impact, but with curious appendages resembling pincers folded at its sides. As Martin unveiled his own creation, a lumbering automaton covered in mismatched patches, someone in the crowd called out, "Begin!" The two machines faced off within their chalk circle, the audience holding its collective breath. Martin's automaton lurched forward with surprising speed, intent on ramming its foe, but Boush's robot sidestepped at the last instant with an agility none expected. With a deft twist, it extended one pincer to grip its opponent by an exposed axle, and yanked sharply. A metallic snap echoed across the ring as Martin's robot toppled over, its wheels spinning uselessly in mid-air. The crowd erupted in cheers and groans. Martin scowled, but could not help laughing at his defeat. In match after match, Boush's creations triumphed, not through brute force, but through cleverness. Spring-loaded traps that ensnared foes, folding arms that absorbed impacts, weighted tails that adjusted balance mid-stride. Each victory brought new challengers and inspired ever more ingenious designs from rivals determined to best him. Weeks melted into months. Tournaments became traditions. Invention became celebration. One chill evening near harvest time, when fireflies shimmered above fields ripe for reaping, Boush found himself alone atop the clock tower, where he often retreated to think. The gears within its heart turned ponderously beneath his feet. Outside, winds whispered promises of distant lands. He gazed out over roofs, wreathed in wood smoke, the village aglow with lanterns and laughter, and felt something stir inside him. A longing not for recognition or praise, but for understanding, for knowledge that eluded even his most dogged efforts. There must be more, he thought fiercely, some secret beyond what I can see or touch. He closed his eyes, and in that darkness pictured machines more wondrous than any yet conceived, constructs that could soar like birds or swim like fish, engines powered not by wind or water, but by sunlight itself, devices that could heal wounds or shape metal without flame. A faint shiver ran through him, not fear, but anticipation, a sense that somewhere out there lay answers waiting to be found, if only he dared seek them. That same night, he returned home late, a hush fallen over every alleyway save for distant echoes from revelers' songs, and found his mother waiting up for him by candlelight. Her hair had grown silver at her temples. Her hands shook slightly as she poured him tea. "You push yourself too hard," she chided gently as steam rose between them. "Sleep is as important as invention." He smiled ruefully, but accepted her admonishment. They sat together, the silence companionable save for crackling firewood, and at last she asked softly, "Why do you never rest, my son?" Boush hesitated, then spoke words truer than any calculation. "I can't stop thinking, what if I'm missing something? What if tomorrow I see something I never noticed before?" She reached across and took his hand, her grip warm despite its frailty. "You're not missing anything that matters," she whispered. "What you seek will find you when it's time." He squeezed her fingers in return, comforted by her faith, even as doubts gnawed at him anew. In those days before disaster and long before exile, the reticulated plateau was a place of hope and possibility, where gears turned ceaselessly beneath gentle hands, where laughter mingled with invention, where even a boy named Boush believed that understanding could be built one cog at a time. But shadows lengthen even on sunlit hills, and somewhere deep within that brilliant mind, seeds were sown for questions whose answers would change everything. For now, though, as moonlight spilled across rooftops and dreams flickered behind closed eyes, the future waited patiently beyond reach, quietly ticking toward destiny. Tinker, the clockwork genius. Part 2. Gears of Inspiration. Dawn broke crystalline and cold. The sky above the reticulated plateau washed in a gradient of pale pink and gold. The gentle fog receded along the cobbled lanes, revealing a village transformed, not by the touch of time, but by the ever-spinning mind of its youngest prodigy. No longer were the mornings marked only by the crowing of cocks and the creak of windmills. Now a chorus of mechanical chirrups and metallic whirs joined in as inventions both humble and wondrous awoke to greet the sun. Boush had been up before any rooster, his nimble fingers already blackened with oil and graphite. He knelt beneath the eaves of the old smithy, peering into the copper innards of his latest automaton, a spry little thing with 4 splayed legs, a bulbous head like a beetle's, and a belly filled with precisely notched gears. Around him, a gathering of eager faces watched with wide eyes and barely contained laughter. "Careful!" Boush hissed through a grin as he adjusted a coil. "One wrong twist and it'll chase chickens instead of the finish line." A ripple of laughter danced through the crowd. Older men with eyebrows like bushels, girls with ribboned braids, boys clutching stubby wooden hammers. Among them stood Baron, a stocky youth whose face forever wore a look of stubborn challenge. Mira, whose nimble hands could coax melody from even broken lutes, and twins Oral and Elin, inseparable and irrepressible, already plotting a prank involving a smoke bomb and a wheelbarrow. Today was the day, the first formal tournament of clockwork creations. What had begun as a childish contest outside Boush's workshop had grown into something grander, fueled by whispers of competition and pride. Word had spread through the plateau's villages. Boush is hosting battles of inventions. Come see if you can outsmart the clockwork genius. The arena of innovation. By mid-morning, the village square had been transformed. The benches and barrels usually reserved for market day had been rearranged to form a crude ring, a sort of miniature coliseum ringed with ropes. Painted banners depicted stylized gears and bolts. Children dashed about with parchment scorecards patterned after those used by scholars in far-off universities. At the heart of it all stood Boush's own automaton, Cogsprout, his first masterpiece. Newly polished for the occasion, rivals encircled it, Baron's iron beetle, all armor and bluster, Mira's windtail, light as a feather, with wings fashioned from thresher leaves, Aurel and Island's absurd contraption, part sled, part alarm clock, part inexplicable. Elders lined the front row, their eyes twinkled above furrowed brows. Even Master Fenric, chief engineer and town skeptic, had set aside his usual disdain for childish amusements, muttering as he checked his pocket watch. "Let the first challenge begin!" cried Boush, his voice ringing clear. Clashes of ingenuity. The rules were simple. 2 machines would face off at a time, each striving to push its rival from a chalk-drawn circle or disable it with clever mechanisms. No magic allowed, only gears, springs, levers, and wit. The first round pitted Cogsprout against Iron Beetle. Baron's creation was heavier by half, a squat juggernaut bristling with makeshift armor plates hammered from tin buckets. "Don't blink," Baron boasted. "Mine rolls right over anything." Boush only smiled and wound Cogsprout's key. With the ring cleared, the battle commenced. Iron Beetle charged forward, but Cogsprout sidestepped on spindly legs with unnatural grace. At Boush's signal, its little tail flicked open, releasing marbles that scattered beneath Iron Beetle's wheels. The armored beast lurched wildly, lost traction, spun in place, and rolled itself out of bounds as onlookers erupted in laughter. Baron scowled, but extended a grudging hand. Boush shook it warmly. A spark spreads. One bout bled into the next. Windtail danced circles around heavier foes, using her wings to catch gusts from bellows hidden under benches. Mira smirked in satisfaction as her machine glided overhead before descending dramatically onto the back of an unwary opponent. Aurel and Elan's tickle chariot released clouds of itching powder at key moments, sending rivals' operators into sneezing fits. Each defeat brought not resentment, but curiosity. Children peered beneath fallen machines to study their gear trains. Elders traded quiet bets on which design would prevail next. The air grew thick with the tang of oil and possibility. Between matches, Boush dashed from team to team. He offered advice freely. How to reduce friction here, strengthen an axle there, balance weight to avoid toppling in corners. "You're helping your opponents?" Mira teased as she refastened Windtail's wings after a narrow loss. "If I don't," Boush replied with a crooked grin, "next time won't be nearly as fun." She shook her head, but smiled through her mock annoyance. Rivalry takes root. As weeks passed, these contests became ritual, first monthly, then fortnightly. The village green soon echoed not with idle chatter, but arguments over gear ratios and spring tensions. With laughter at spectacular failures, the day Aurel accidentally launched his automaton into the dunk pond was already legend. But rivalry sharpened more than blades. It honed minds. Baron, once all brute force, returned each time with lighter frames and subtler tricks. False compartments stuffed with counterweights, magnetic traps hidden beneath his chassis to snare metallic foes. Mira experimented with glider wings that could detach in mid-air to bewilder pursuers. Soon, she had apprentices of her own. As for Boush, each victory only drove him further. Where others saw boundaries, weight limits, time constraints, He saw challenges to be overcome. He began sketching designs late into the night. Automata shaped like manticores or wyverns, clockwork dogs capable of tracking scents, mechanisms that could dance in time with lute music. His fame grew across the plateau. Farmers brought broken tools for repair or improvement. Wandering traders bartered trinkets for glimpses of new inventions. Letters arrived from distant villages asking for blueprints or advice. Yet always, after every triumph, Boush felt the same niggling itch deep inside. There must be more. The Elder's Challenge. One stormy afternoon near mid-season, rain slapping roof shingles like thrown pebbles, Master Fenric paid an unexpected visit to Boush's cluttered workshop. The old engineer loomed in the doorway, rain dripping from his cloak onto blueprints spread across the floor. "You think yourself clever," Fenric rumbled, eyes sharp, "but cleverness without direction is wasted energy." Boush looked up from a nest of wires and cogs. "What do you mean?" Fenric set down a battered lantern. "It's one thing to amuse children with toys or build clever little battle machines, but what good do they serve? Games are well and fine for sharpening wits, but real invention must protect or elevate us. Prove your worth. Create something that guards our village, not just entertains it." Rain hammered all the harder against the glass. Boush met the elder's gaze without flinching. "I accept," he said softly. Behind Fenric, Mira peeked through the open door. She had come to return a borrowed toolkit, but lingered at mention of this challenge. "Need help?" she asked after Fenric had gone. Boush hesitated only an instant before nodding. A community transformed. Word spread quickly. A new contest was announced, not for glory or delight this time, but for protection. Designs poured forth from every corner of the village, sentry towers powered by water wheels, mechanical scarecrows disguised as ogres, alarms that shrieked when tripped by prowlers or wolves. Workshops hummed day and night as teams formed and rivalries deepened into friendships, or sharpened into fierce competition. Old enmities faded under shared purpose. Strangers became collaborators as blueprints were traded over mugs of spiced tea. Boush led by example, organizing gatherings in the market square where inventors could test prototypes in view of all. Failures were applauded even louder than successes. Each misstep was dissected for hidden wisdom. "Every broken cog is a lesson," he declared after one spectacular mishap sent an automaton tumbling off a roof into a haystack, eliciting applause from all but the startled goats. Baron took charge of construction teams. Mira oversaw material acquisition. Aurel and Ilan conducted stress tests, often by flinging vegetables at unsuspecting sentry bots. Even Master Fenric emerged from his solitude to offer reluctant praise for clever solutions and biting critique for those that bent rules too far. Dota's echoes. It was during these feverish months that curious visitors began arriving from neighboring towns. Some ordinary craftsmen eager to learn, others shrouded in mystery. A merchant woman named Yara bore trinkets marked with runes resembling those rumored among sorcerers from Weeping Rosewood or Frost-Bitten Dragonspire. She lingered over Boush's schematics, occasionally offering odd suggestions. What if your sentry could recognize faces, not only bodies? Could it be taught to ignore friends but sound alarm at strangers? Boush puzzled over these ideas long after Yara left, wondering if their machines might someday rival even magical constructs whispered about in legends, like those fabled golems rumored to guard ancient ruins near Stonehall, or constructs used by artificers in far-off lands where mana flowed wild as water. For now, though, his focus remained on what could be built by mortal hands alone, bonds forged in creation. As autumn deepened, so too did bonds between Boush and those he inspired. He found himself confiding in Mira late one evening as they calibrated gyroscopes beneath lantern light. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm pushing too hard," he admitted quietly. "If I'm missing what matters, chasing after every problem." She glanced up from her soldering iron, brow furrowed in mock severity. "If you ever stopped chasing problems, you'd cease being you." He chuckled, a sound made rare by exhaustion, and returned to his work feeling lighter somehow. Baron, too, softened over time. Grudging respect gave way to camaraderie during long nights spent mending splintered frames or arguing over which alloy best resisted wear from rainstorms off the plateau. Even Aurel and Elan, with their endless appetite for mischief, grew serious when tasked with programming patrol routes for their sentry bots. By harvest's end, every home bore some mark of their collective genius. Doors fitted with clockwork locks that sang when tampered with, lamp posts that brightened at dusk without need for flame, scarecrows that spun their arms whenever crows drew near, and occasionally when Elan whistled at just the right pitch. The night before unveiling, on the eve of unveiling their final designs, a night thick with mist and anticipation, a hush fell over Boush's workshop. He stood alone amid tools and tinkerings, staring at his sentinel, a slender automaton painted moon-white, its eyes tiny lenses able to pierce shadow and fog alike. It was not merely clever, it was beautiful. Elegant solutions woven together so tightly even Master Fenric had failed to find true fault. But still, Boush felt restless, a sense he had not yet solved the greatest riddle lurking at the heart of invention itself. As he tightened one last screw, Mira entered quietly. "Finished?" she asked. "Almost," he replied, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. She waited until he looked up before speaking again. "We're making something wonderful here, and not just machines." He smiled softly then, realizing she saw what he sometimes forgot, that gears alone didn't change worlds. It was hearts and hands working together that truly transformed them. The unveiling. Come morning, all gathered at the square, now festooned with garlands woven from autumn leaves and copper wire. The air buzzed not only with excitement, but pride, a pride born not only from victory, but shared effort. One by one, inventions were demonstrated. Sentinels that scanned alleys for movement, alarms that chimed melodiously rather than shrieked, guardians made not to intimidate, but reassure, clockwork dogs patrolling alongside children on their way to lessons, lanterns that dimmed rather than extinguished when rain fell too hard. When Boush presented his automaton, the sentinel who bowed politely before every villager before taking up post, the elders rose as one and applauded until tears gleamed on gnarled cheeks. Master Fenric offered only a curt nod, but later pressed a heavy bronze medal into Boush's hand. "For brilliance tempered by service," he murmured before hastening away lest anyone see him smile. "A new tradition." So began an era unlike any before it, a season where invention bred not only competition, but collaboration, where children played side by side with their own creations, where old fears of night predators or wandering thieves became mere stories told by firelight, while sentry eyes kept silent watch outside shuttered doors. And still, After each festival ended, after every victory banquet faded into memory, Boush climbed nightly to the top of the old clock tower to dream of what might come next. Machines that might fly beyond clouds or dive beneath rivers, engines that could heal or build or protect on scales unimagined. Yet, even as he gazed out on rooftops silvered by moonlight, he knew this much for certain. Whatever wonders tomorrow might bring, they would come from minds set free not merely to compete, but to create together. In that golden autumn, the last untouched by coming shadows, the seeds planted by one boy's restless mind began at last to blossom across all reticulated plateau. Not only gears turned now, but hearts as well, and destiny itself ticked on, just out of sight, waiting for genius to dare reach further still. Tinker, the clockwork genius. Part 3. Sentinels and Saviors. The first frost of winter crept across the reticulated plateau, frosting each wildflower and copper vein with a crystalline shimmer, and turning even the most stubborn streams sluggish and silent. The village, though vibrant with invention, drew close for warmth. Lantern lights spilled onto snow-dusted cobblestones, and the air forever carried the sharp tang of hot oil and iron filings. But beneath this veneer of peace, concern gnawed at every heart. Wolves had grown bolder, and travelers told of shadows slipping between moonlit pines, of goods gone missing, and footprints vanishing into fog. Boush, now 15, but with eyes that had seen more midnight than most elders awake, stood before the elders' council in the narrow hall beside the clock tower. Master Fenric presided, his brow furrowed as if every word cost him a measure of pride. The council's benches were packed, engineers in sooty leather aprons, farmers turned tinkerers, Mira with her ever-present notebook, the mayor's wife whose grandchild had nearly been lost to wolves only weeks before. Boush, his hands stained anew, his hair wild from restless nights, stood at the heart of their attention. He began not with bluster or promise, but with a question. Do we wish to live in fear of what lurks outside our lanterns? Or will we build something that answers fear not with swords or shouts, but with vigilance and reason? A murmur ran through the hall. Master Fenric nodded once. Speak plainly, Boush. And Boush did, laying out blueprints unfurled on long oak tables, gears and glass lenses glinting beneath lantern light, describing not just machines, but a system, a network of guardians weaving around the entire village like a net of watchful eyes. The architect of safety. Over the following weeks, the village transformed into a living laboratory. Where others might have seen an end to warmth and easy days, Boush saw purpose. He worked through dawns and dusks, joined by a growing cadre of volunteers, Mira chief among them, each drawn by the gravity of his vision. They began by mapping every street and alley, every hedge and shortcut children might take to escape lessons. Boush spoke with shepherds about wolf paths and with merchants about thieves' tricks. He listened, really listened, in a way that made even stoic Fenric grudgingly proud. Design followed function. Sentinels would sweep perimeters, scanning with their aperture eyes for movement or sound beyond set thresholds. Compact guardians shaped like hounds would roam closer to homes and workshops, alert but gentle, programmed never to chase except in true danger. Lanterns embedded with tiny rotating mirrors would signal one another soundlessly when something amiss was detected. At the center of it all stood the clock tower control array, a marvel of relays and punch card computations more intricate than any loom. Boush set to work there nightly, calibrating sensitivity so no stray fox or owl brought needless panic. Brilliant collaboration. One stormy night found Boush hunched over a brass chassis in his modest workshop, its windows rattling with wind, Mira's pen scratching quick notes on the bench beside him, Mira's brow furrowed. The hound's gait is too stiff. See? She mimed a limping step. Boush glanced up from his soldering iron. I reinforced the joints last hour. They should be more flexible. She shook her head. But it's reading pebbles as obstacles. He grinned. That's an easy fix. But Mira caught his wrist gently. Not everything's about fixing. Sometimes it's about learning why it broke. He paused, then nodded. Together, they disassembled the leg housing. Mira traced the pressure sensors while Boush recalibrated the drive gear tension. They worked wordlessly until dawn breached the horizon in silver-pink bands. Downstairs, Master Fenric arrived early, habit formed by decades' patience, and watched them quietly from the threshold. He'd always dismissed Boush's fancies as childish optimism, but he could not deny what he saw now. Unity forged of purpose and trust. The night of testing. The first true test arrived not in sunlight, but beneath a swath of starlit sky. Snow muffled every step as villagers gathered at the square, breath steaming in nervous anticipation. 8 sentinels, tall, spindly forms painted moon-white and brass, lined the perimeter road. 4 clockwork hounds prowled closer to the houses, tails wagging on cunning gyroscopes. Boush stood atop a crate, voice steady despite trembling hands. Tonight, we see not only what these machines are capable of, but what we are capable of together. Fenric whispered to Mira at his side. I've never seen him so sure. The test began. Volunteers slipped through alleyways as intruders, while children giggled from behind fences. The sentinels' lenses flashed. Soft chimes rang when they detected movement. The clockwork hounds intercepted thieves gently but firmly, herding them toward waiting elders rather than tackling or frightening them. Suddenly, a real alarm. From across the orchard came frantic barking. Boush's heart lurched. He dashed toward the commotion. Villagers followed at a run. There, a trapped wolf, thin and desperate, snarling as one mechanical hound kept it at bay, while another barked for help in perfect imitation of a shepherd's dog. Boush approached carefully, speaking softly to both machine and beast. With calm commands, he ordered the sentinels to stand back. When the wolf lunged at him out of sheer terror, Fenric braced for tragedy. But Boush did not flinch. Instead, he knelt slowly and extended a gloved hand, speaking in low tones until even the wolf seemed to hesitate, uncertain in face of such quiet courage. Finally, it retreated into the woods, beaten not by force, but by understanding. The villagers erupted in applause. Fenric's eyes glistened. Mira hugged Boush fiercely. The engineer's approval, the next morning, brought more than celebration. It brought scrutiny. 3 senior engineers from neighboring towns arrived, drawn by tales spreading through trade caravans, tales of machines that protected without violence, that learned from their mistakes, that acted in service to all. They tested every mechanism mercilessly, tinkering with gear ratios until stress points revealed themselves, programming flaws into punch cards to see if the sentinels adapted. They did. simulating emergencies from fires to lost children, each time finding Boush's inventions not only functional, but remarkably well considered for safety. One old engineer, bald save for a single silver braid, pulled Boush aside after sunset. His accent was thick with distant hills. "You think like an engineer," he said quietly, "but you feel like a guardian." He pressed a small brass token into Boush's palm, an emblem etched with interlocking gears encircling an open eye, the highest mark of respect among plateau inventors. Boush blinked in astonishment. Mira beamed like sunrise itself. Seeds of change. The new system transformed daily life in subtle ways. Children raced clockwork dogs on their way to lessons. Old folks slept soundly as sentinels swept silent arcs through moonlit lanes. Merchants returned from distant fairs without fear. Even travelers stopped to marvel at how peace could be engineered from ingenuity rather than iron. But not all was ease. Some villagers felt uneasy. A few muttered that so many eyes watched too closely. Others feared what would happen if these machines ever turned against them. Boush heard every concern. He invited skeptics into his workshop, showed them how fail-safes worked, how human override trumped any automaton directive. He taught children how to disarm hounds should they ever malfunction, a rare humility for one so young. In time, even doubters softened, for what could they say against nights spent safe and undisturbed? Nighttime reflections. Winter deepened. Icicles grew long as knife blades from eaves. One night, Boush climbed to the clock tower's apex, alone save for whirring gears and Mira's distant laughter below. He looked down upon his village, lanterns casting shadows shaped not by fear, but by invention. Sentinels standing silent guard as snow fell soft as memory. Fenric joined him unexpectedly, carrying 2 mugs of spiced cider. "Drink," he grunted. "You've earned it." They stood side by side in silence, watching their little world turn beneath them. "You've changed things," Fenric said at last. Boush glanced at him sidelong. "For better or worse?" Fenric sipped thoughtfully. "For better, for now." He hesitated. "But change always carries cost." Boush nodded. Already he felt something stirring inside, a hunger to do more, to test boundaries he could barely glimpse beyond frosted glass panes. Below them, the sentinels strode silently through snowdrifts, gentle giants built from hope rather than hubris. Rumors beyond. Word spread swiftly across plateau and vale. Messengers arrived bearing questions for the boy who made machines keep watch. Traders offered rare metals in exchange for blueprints. Even scholars from distant Druid University wrote requesting treatises on mechanical consciousness. Mira delighted in each letter, tracing routes on her much-annotated maps. "Imagine," she whispered one evening as they sorted correspondence together by candlelight, "all those minds thinking together." Boush smiled, then grew serious as he fingered Fenric's token in his pocket. He wondered how far safety could truly be engineered, or when curiosity would demand a price greater than anyone expected. A time for gratitude. As solstice neared, the longest night, the village gathered beneath garlands of wire and evergreen boughs for quiet thanks. Mira stood beside Boush as children presented handmade medals. Elders offered fresh bread and old stories in gratitude for peaceful dreams restored. Fenric addressed the assembly. "We have always trusted what we understood, or thought we did," he said gravely. "Now we live under new guardianship. But let us never forget that true safety comes not from machines alone, but from those who use them wisely." And so that night ended not only with celebration, but with renewed purpose. For Boush, for all his youth and wonder, had shown what could be achieved when genius served community rather than ego, when invention wove itself gently into daily life. But as the candles burned low and villagers drifted homeward beneath sentinel gaze, one truth remained. Some boundaries are easily crossed. Others wait in shadow just beyond sight. And Boush, the clockwork genius, had only begun to glimpse what waited there. Thus did frost settle over reticulated plateau, not as omen of dread, but as promise that even amidst winter's silence, new wonders would soon awaken, and destiny itself would tick ever onward, yearning for the touch of daring hands. Tinker, the Clockwork Genius, Part 4. Beneath the surface. Midwinter sun shone pale and distant over the reticulated plateau, its light little more than a rumor. The snowdrifts muffled every sound, but the clack of gears and the low, urgent voices drifting from the workshop that now dominated the heart of the village. Yet even this was but a surface reflection. True wonder and true anxiety lay hidden deeper still, where earth and ambition conspired together. Boush no longer worked alone. His innovations had transformed the village, but true innovation rarely blooms in solitude. The world had noticed. Letters arrived daily, treatises penned in dense, looping script, packages filled with rare alloys, curious crystals, and diagrams annotated with foreign runes. Mira would greet each delivery with laughter, stacking them atop her already teetering map cases, while Fenric grumbled about strangers meddling with honest work. But it was Boush who sifted through every word, every gear, searching for kindred spirits, voices that resonated not merely with curiosity, but with courage. By late winter, he had quietly assembled his team, the Gathering. They met first by lantern light in the shadow of the clock tower, hands raw with cold and anticipations alike. Boush's selection was meticulous. Mira, naturally, her nimble fingers as deft with a soldering iron as with a quill, her mind ablaze with a cartographer's hunger to chart the unknown. Old Fenric, whose skepticism was a necessary ballast. When others grew intoxicated by possibility, he saw the dangers lurking behind each untested circuit. Gregor, the stoic metalsmith from the southeastern hills, whose family had forged armor for kings and whose hammer strokes were measured as a heartbeat. Anya, still barely older than Boush himself, whose chemical experiments in her parents' barn had once forced half the village to evacuate, but whose intuition for volatile compounds bordered on preternatural. Eldest Lura, memory keeper and mathematician, whose trembling hands could still calculate orbital trajectories and solve problems while others quailed before their complexity. And Boush, restless, burning Boush, at their center. Their voices mingled awkwardly at first, Mira's bright questions rebounding off Gregor's monosyllabic grunts, Anya's wild theorizing deflected by Fenric's pointed frown. But beneath it all pulsed something electric, a sense that together they might reach heights unscalable alone. It was Mira who first voiced what none dared say outright. We're not simply building machines anymore, we're exploring, mapping what's never been mapped, not just above ground but below. Her words lingered long after the lanterns guttered low, conceiving the labyrinth. The old workshop quickly grew too small for their ambitions. Boush began sketching plans for something greater, a sanctuary for invention that would outlast snowmelt and summer storms alike. In secret, for not all villagers welcomed such deep delving, they scouted beneath the clock tower, a tangle of root-choked tunnels left behind by forgotten miners, half collapsed and brimming with the scent of ancient stone. Here, Boush saw potential, space for engines undreamed of, for chemical vats and batteries whose power dwarfed anything yet known atop the plateau. Not just a workshop, he told them one night, eyes glinting in reflected candlefire. A laboratory of possibilities, a place to test what must be tested without fear of harming what we love above. Fenric snorted. Or a crypt for fools who dig too deep. But even he joined in, hands steady as he braced beams and shored up walls. The work was grueling, the stones stubborn, but each strike echoed with purpose. Days became weeks. They smuggled supplies after dusk, copper wire coiled like sleeping serpents, gears polished to mirror brightness, glass vials filled with liquids that shimmered like captured starlight. Gregor's hammer rang out through the night. Mira mapped every chamber and tunnel with obsessive care. Anya's laughter bounced from stone to stone as she devised ever more dangerous mixtures. Eldest Lura pored over blueprints until her eyes began to water. At dawn each morning they emerged, blinking into white sunlight, disheveled but alive with the thrill of creation. First failures, not all experiments, yielded fruit. Gregor's attempt to forge self-repairing alloys ended in an acrid haze that stained the ceiling black for weeks. Mira's mechanical cartographer beetle stubbornly refused to walk straight, insisting on burrowing downward instead of mapping outward, a quirk that would one day prove prescient, though none recognized it then. Anya's effort to create a battery capable of storing atmospheric lightning ended in disaster. A thunderous detonation shook the lab and left a patch of wall glassy smooth, while the rest of them ducked behind tables. Only Boush seemed unfazed, scribbling frantic notes on what went wrong and how it might be harnessed next time. Morale wavered. Gregor argued with Anya over unstable alloys. Mira snapped at Fenric after he cautioned her about using untested gyroscopes in her automaton designs. Even eldest Lura lost patience one stormy afternoon and slammed her cipher slate down in frustration. Yet always Boush drew them back together, sometimes quietly, sometimes with fierce words. Every error is a signpost, he insisted during one particularly tense gathering, pointing toward something no one else has seen. He showed them his own hands, burned again by a failed coil experiment, and grinned lopsidedly. If you're not making mistakes, you're not pushing far enough. Gradually, their setbacks became lessons rather than wounds, secrets and shadows. The deeper they dug, both into stone and into knowledge, the more Boush felt an itch at the back of his mind. There were patterns here. Certain failures repeated themselves in ways that seemed intentional. Once, while tracing power lines late at night, he found a single wire neatly snipped. No jagged edges or telltale scorch marks. He said nothing at first, but when another automaton's memory coil vanished without explanation, and only after Mira insisted it had been there an hour before, unease grew. Was it sabotage? Or simply exhaustion twisting their senses? Boush watched his team closely after that, especially Fenric, always on edge, and Gregor, whose silences grew heavier by the day. Meanwhile, word spread among the villagers about strange lights flickering from beneath their feet. Some whispered blessings, others muttered about hubris and machines stealing souls. Once or twice angry elders confronted Boush in the square, but Mira stood by his side each time, cool-eyed and unbending. "They fear what they do not understand," she told him afterward in a low voice. "But so did we, before we learned to look deeper." The turning point, late one night, when only wind and distant wolf cries disturbed the plateau, Boush awoke in a sweat. He'd dreamed of gears turning backward, time unwinding until all his work crumbled into dust. Unable to sleep, he descended into the lab alone. The air was cold. His breath plumed white before him as he checked each experiment in turn. Mira's beetle nestled dormant atop its map. Gregor's new alloys stacked in neat rows. Anya's batteries humming softly behind thick glass panes. Then, at the farthest tunnel, the one choked most with roots, he heard it, soft whirring, punctuated by metallic clicks not of his design. Boush crept forward, gripping a wrench, more weapon than tool in this moment, and found nothing obvious, only darkness beyond his lamp's reach. Yet, as he turned to go, something tiny scuttled past his boot, a clockwork bug almost identical to Mira's, but bearing strange runes etched along its carapace. He gathered it up and carried it to Lura first thing next morning. Together, they pored over its mechanism. The runes matched none known from any previous correspondence or device. Not even those rumored to come from Druid University's arcane workshops. "It's like someone testing us," Lura whispered at last. Boush tucked the automaton away in a locked drawer. He didn't mention it to the others, not yet, but resolved to double their vigilance. If secrets moved beneath them, they would meet those secrets head-on. Bonds forged in fire. Setbacks bred arguments. Fear fed suspicion. But it was crisis that finally bound them. During an experiment meant to synchronize 3 Sentinel automatons by wireless signal, a feat no one had yet achieved, the lab's main circuit overloaded. Sparks arced across benches. Paper caught fire. Toxic smoke began filling every corner. For one frozen moment, nobody moved. But then Gregor charged for the main shut-off valve, even as burning insulation fell around him. Mira threw open vent hatches. Anya doused flames with a concoction that sizzled but stifled further spread. Even Fenric, usually so cautious, dragged a malfunctioning automaton clear with bare hands blistering on hot brass. Boush himself seized up a wrench and smashed through a jammed door to allow escape for Lura and 2 startled mice she kept as observers. When finally they stumbled blinking into morning's frost-bitten air, soot streaked but alive, they collapsed together on snowy stones outside the clock tower entrance. Nobody spoke for a long while. Then Anya began to giggle, a bubbling sound half mad from adrenaline, and soon they were all laughing helplessly beneath a sky brightening into fragile blue. Afterward, something subtle had changed. Arguments turned into debates rather than fights. Secrets became shared more freely. Even Fenric conceded, with only minimal grumbling, that maybe there's something to be said for having extra hands after all. Dawn of ambition. Spring threatened at last. Icicles drip, tapping along eaves. And with renewed energy came new ideas. Mira perfected her mapping beetles. Their footsteps now traced not just corridors, but fluctuations in magnetic fields deep beneath stone. Lura developed new algorithms allowing them to predict faults before they cracked open tunnels or shattered glassware. Gregor discovered how to layer alloys in micro-thin bands that flexed under strain rather than snapping outright. A revelation for automatons intended for mobility outside protected halls. Anya created an electrolytic cell capable of storing lightning, not from storms, which proved too dangerous, but siphoned gently from ambient static, enough to power lamps and tools without risk of catastrophic discharge. And Boush himself? He began experimenting with concepts no villager had ever considered. Recursive logic circuits mimicking decision-making, mechanical eyes that could see motion even through total darkness, tiny turbines extracting heat from difference between rock layers and flowing water far below. Each breakthrough drew them closer, not just as colleagues, but as confidants, not simply co-workers, but as family forged by shared purpose. Shadows grow long. Still, the sense of watching eyes persisted. Sometimes Mira would find her beetle's maps altered subtly overnight, corridor angles wrong by half a degree here or there. Once, even a chamber marked that none remembered building. Lura found an equation scratched into chalkboard space she'd carefully erased only an hour before. A formula describing resonance frequencies she hadn't yet considered herself. One midnight, as Boush finished calibrating an optical sensor array near the deepest well shaft, a sudden chill prickled along his skin. He turned to see Fenric standing behind him, lantern casting wild shadows across pitted stone. "You should rest," Fenric said quietly. "I can't," Boush replied, voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "There are patterns, things we're missing." Fenric hesitated before placing a weathered hand on his shoulder. "Don't lose yourself chasing shadows. The world above still needs you, too." Boush nodded absently, but even then his mind whirred faster than any gear below. Emergence. The laboratory was nearly complete. Generators humming contentedly, steam rising from meticulously jacketed pipes, automatons patrolling tunnels on precise routines mapped by Mira's beetles. They held an informal opening, more superstition than ceremony, with bread broken among team members amid tables cluttered with tools and blueprints stained by months of sweat and invention. There were nervous jokes about haunting spirits. Anya swore she'd seen luminous eyes peering from cracks in wallstone, but mostly there was pride, a sense of achievement scored deep by shared ordeal. Still, the mystery of runes on that strange automaton lingered like a splinter beneath Boush's skin. He spent sleepless nights dissecting its workings, realizing too late that some components used alloys unfamiliar even to Gregor. Coils wrapped not clockwise or counterclockwise, but in shifting patterns that responded only to magnetic fields beyond common reckoning. That was when he began noticing echoes, faint ticks behind walls, glimmers at tunnel edges where light should die, whispers almost lost beneath hum of machinery. "You are not alone. Others have delved here before. Some boundaries are not meant for crossing." He recorded these sensations meticulously, even as he drove his team harder still toward new horizons, ever more complex automatons, batteries storing days' worth of power, sensors capable of detecting vibration miles distant. Each success was a balm against uncertainty, but also a step closer toward some unseen line none could see until crossed. A new purpose. One evening at shift's end, they gathered once more atop the old clock tower, breath steaming in moonlight as they looked down upon their village newly thrumming with hidden energy. "We've built more than machines," Boush said softly, voice barely carrying above wind. "We've built hope." Mira squeezed his hand in silent agreement. Gregor grunted approval. Anya beamed up at stars so bright they seemed within reach. If only she could build a ladder tall enough. Even Fenric managed a crooked smile before muttering about foolish idealists. Yet beneath joy lurked truth. Every invention opened new questions, and some doors once forced open by genius and will alike can never be closed again. As dawn crept over rhymed hills, they descended back toward warmth of home. But already Boush's mind raced ahead, probing mysteries beneath reticulated plateau, searching for answers only daring hands might uncover, and never truly forgetting that somewhere deeper still, secrets waited with patient hunger for discovery or doom. Tinker, the Clockwork Genius. Part 5. The Threshold of the Impossible. The days after the opening of the laboratory passed in a fevered blur. Boush's mind, once set ablaze by the promise of pure invention, found itself ensnared in something altogether stranger and darker. The mysterious automaton with its impossible alloys and shifting rune script lingered in every waking thought and haunted his dreams with visions of machinery that whispered in tongues unknown. His journals became filled not only with diagrams, but with questions that strayed ever closer to the domain of the forbidden. Could there be knowledge beyond science? Could genius itself have boundaries, ones set not by intellect, but by nature or fate? And so it was that Boush, once the golden child of the reticulated plateau, began to walk a double path. One foot in the world of gears and formulae, the other tentatively treading the shadowed margins of the arcane. 1. The erosion of certainty. The laboratory had become both sanctuary and prison. By day, it rang with the familiar sounds of industry, Mira's beetles clicking over circuit boards, Gregor muttering curses as he welded new chassis, Anya, ever curious, sketching ideas for sensor arrays that might see through stone. But at night, when the gas lights burned low and most of the team retreated to their bunks, Boush remained, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands trembling as they leafed through ancient dust-caked tomes borrowed from Fenric's private collection. These books were not written by scientists, but by those who called themselves seekers, scribes, or, more ominously, arcanists. Their pages were filled with diagrams of impossible geometries and languages that shifted beneath the eye. At first, Boush scorned them as superstition, but then, by chance or fate, a phrase leapt out at him. Where science ends, the veil thins. Where the veil thins, knowledge awaits, if only you dare to reach across. He closed the book with shaking fingers. Second seeds of discord. Mira was the first to sense the change. "You're working yourself to death again," she said one evening, bringing him a mug of bitterroot tea. "Gregor says you haven't slept in 2 days." Boush managed a wan smile. "There's too much to do." She sat beside him, peering at the mountain of open books and blueprints piled on his work table. "You're chasing something new," she observed, "but you're different now, distant." He hesitated. Should he confide in her? The urge to share his burden warred with shame. "I found something in Fenric's collection," he said at last. "Something that it doesn't fit with what I know." Mira frowned. "Magic?" He laughed, brittle and humorless. "Supposedly, only parts of it make sense. The runes we found on the automaton, they match diagrams in these texts." She was silent for a long moment. Then, "What are you going to do?" Boush looked down at his hands. "I have to understand it." Third, the forbidden synthesis. The next weeks were consumed by an obsession deeper than anything Boush had known before. He assembled his team nightly for feverish brainstorming sessions, ostensibly to improve their sensor arrays or automate new systems, but always steering discussion toward anomalies, metals behaving contrary to physical law, patterns in energy readings that could not be explained by known science. One evening, after Mira and Gregor had argued about whether resonant anomalies could indicate a hidden power source or were simply measurement error, Anya stayed behind. She watched Boush examining a page covered in looping glyphs. Her voice was small but steady. "You want to build something new." He glanced up, startled by her insight. "You're scared," she said gently, "but you're more afraid not to know." Boush closed the tome and whispered, "There's a theory here, a way to cross into another state of reality. Not dream or death, but another world entirely. And you want to open a door," she finished for him. He nodded. "I want to help," she said simply. That night marked a turning point. Secrecy gave way to collaboration, though not without friction. Gregor bristled at talk of unmeasurable energies, insisting on hard data. Mira worried that they were chasing phantoms, but Boush's conviction was infectious. Soon even Fenric found himself tinkering late into the night, testing metals according to patterns found in magical codices. They mapped out a plan, a synthesis of science and sorcery, to construct a device capable of tearing through the fabric that separated their world from whatever lay beyond. Fourth, building the portal. The laboratory became a theater of fevered creation. They constructed a ring of interlocking plates forged from metals harvested deep beneath the plateau, fused with slivers of enchanted alloy scavenged from the strange automaton. At each junction, Boush inscribed runes copied from the forbidden texts, his trembling stylus guided by intuition more than reason. Beneath the ring, they built a lattice of copper wires forming fractal patterns, each connection wired into humming batteries charged by steam turbines and kinetic generators. To this machinery, they added crystals from ancient riverbeds, Anya's idea, which pulsed with faint inner light when placed within certain geometric arrangements, an effect Mira explained away as piezoelectric resonance, though privately she admitted it unsettled her. At last came the heart of the device, a matrix Gregor assembled from rare earth metals and glassy shards found near a recent meteorite strike. When activated, it sang, not audibly, but somewhere just beyond hearing, a presence that prickled across skin and teeth alike. Progress was not without setbacks. Circuits overloaded, inscriptions warped when exposed to too much current. Once, a power surge sent luminous arcs dancing across the room until Mira's beetles intervened, grounding the energy harmlessly into Earth. Through it all, Boush grew gaunt but relentless, his eyes bright with feverish purpose. 5. Doubt and revelation. On the eve of completion, tempers flared. "We've crossed a line," Gregor growled, tossing aside a smoldering blueprint. This isn't science. This is madness. You're gambling our lives on fairy tales and nightmares? Boush rounded on him, voice ragged. Science is gambling. Every law we know was once unthinkable. If we don't push forward, if we let fear rule us, we remain blind. Mira stepped between them. Enough. We started this together. We finished together. But we all deserve to know what we're risking. Gregor glared, but remained silent. Anya spoke quietly. If we succeed, what then? Boush pressed his hands to his temples. For once, he sounded uncertain. I don't know. But I know that there is something on the other side of this veil that can change everything for us. For everyone. Fenric's voice rasped from the doorway. Just be sure it doesn't change us first. 6th, the night before. That night was sleepless for all. Boush sat alone atop the half-ruined clock tower, watching lightning crawl along distant clouds, a silent echo of his own turmoil. He opened his battered journal and wrote, Tonight is the pivot upon which my life turns. I do this for knowledge, for hope, but also for myself. Yet I wonder, is genius enough to bear such a weight? Or does hubris always demand its due? His hand trembled as he closed the book. Below him, lights burned in the laboratory windows, his friends still preparing for whatever dawn might bring. For a moment, he considered abandoning it all, destroying their work before it could unleash horrors no mind should ever behold. But even then, despite fear and doubt, curiosity burned brighter still. 7th, the opening. The laboratory was transformed into an altar for science and sorcery alike. Chalk sigils glowed faintly on stone tiles, copper rings gleamed beneath lantern light, banks of batteries hummed with reserved power. Each team member took their post. Mira monitored sensor arrays. Gregor stood by manual overrides. Anya perched at her station beside the crystal matrix. Fenric waited near the emergency kill switch, his old face creased by worry as he fingered a talisman shaped like an hourglass. Boush stood at the center of it all, hands hovering over 2 levers set beside the portal ring. Ready? He asked, voice tight. One by one they nodded. He threw the first lever. Energy sizzled through copper veins. The ring began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, as runes shimmered blue-white along its circumference. Anya activated her panel. The crystal matrix flared with inner fire. Shadows twisted along ceiling beams. Mira called out readings, spikes in electromagnetic fields, vibrations off every known chart. Heat blooming where there should be none. The second lever fell. For an instant, a single breathless heartbeat, the portal hung inert. Then space itself convulsed. Light folded inward. Air shattered into prisms. Every metal surface sang with resonance so deep it rattled bones. And at the heart of it all, a blackness bloomed, not emptiness, but depth without bottom or boundary, a window into somewhere else. They had done it. 8. What lies beyond? Silence fell, all save for the impossible murmur rising from within the portal, half music, half cry, a call that seemed to beckon Boush by name. He staggered back as images flickered across its surface. Cities humming with machines unlike any design known. Skies torn by storms that rained liquid glass. Beings formed from logic and starlight who watched him with eyes like spinning gyroscopes. Suddenly, A wrenching pull seized him, not physical but mental. A pressure behind his thoughts urging him toward that endless dark. He fought it back with sheer force of will, but still he felt altered. Some small part of him now belonged elsewhere. Behind him, Mira gasped as her sensors overloaded. Gregor cursed as needles snapped on dials. Anya scribbled frantic notes even as tears streamed down her cheeks at sights no words could capture. Fenric alone seemed unmoved, his old eyes fixed on Boush as if trying to memorize every line of his face before fate could claim him forever. At last, Boush forced himself to step away from the portal's edge. "Shut it down," he barked hoarsely. With practiced hands, they reversed their sequence. The ring slowed, energy bled away, light collapsed inward until only silence remained, save for faint echoes lingering beneath stone and steel. Ninth, the cost. When it was over, they sat in stunned exhaustion among flickering lamps and smoldering wires. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Mira asked, the question hanging over them all, "What did we do?" Boush rubbed his eyes. "We opened a door to another reality entirely, and something looked back." Gregor shuddered. "Did we bring anything through?" "I don't think so," Anya whispered. But no one truly believed her. Fenric spoke last. "It's no longer just about knowledge," he murmured gravely. "Now it is about responsibility and consequences." They all understood, even if none dared say aloud what each felt. If genius had brought them this far, what price would be demanded now for crossing such a line? 10. Aftermath. In days that followed, they rebuilt their machines and reviewed mountains of hastily scribbled data. But nothing quite felt real anymore. Boush caught himself watching shadows linger just a bit too long at corners. Mira woke screaming from dreams where automatons walked through bloodless worlds. Gregor drank heavily and refused to go near the portal ring again. Anya grew strangely obsessed with drawing patterns she'd glimpsed in that blackness, a language only she could see now. Yet, despite doubt and dread darker than any night outside, Boush could not turn away from what they had done, or what might yet await them if they dared step further still into mystery's maw. His genius had crossed into realms unknown, and now he knew there would be no return to simple certainties again. Some doors once opened cannot ever be closed, but some secrets demand pursuit even at greatest peril. Thus ended the 5th chapter, a threshold crossed not only between worlds, but within every soul who stood beside Boush that night, beneath humming lamps and ancient stone, the first true union of science and magic upon reticulated plateau, and harbinger of all that would follow. Tinker, the clockwork genius. Part 6. Into the Uncharted. The days that followed the closing of the portal were unlike any before. In the depths of their underground laboratory, far from prying eyes and the innocent bustle of the village above, Boush and his team became shadows, moving with a hush in corridors lit by sputtering gas lamps and restless arc lights. The air trembled with unsaid questions, each of them shouldering a singular burden. They had looked into an abyss, and it had peered back, calculating. Boush, once energetic and sharp-tongued, was now haunted, his hand steady only when sketching diagrams or coaxing life from wires and crystal. Mira's laughter had vanished, replaced by an anxious silence as she obsessively recalibrated her sensors, desperate for rationality. Gregor kept odd hours, his engineering notes growing erratic, ink smeared by trembling hands. Anya worked in feverish bursts, filling page after page with glyphs and spirals, her eyes hollow, but fever bright. And always, Fenric watched, his face carved from granite, his gaze flickering with both fear and pride for his protege. It was Boush who broke the silence. Finally, one rain-lashed night, when the wind howled like a wounded beast above. Gathered around the battered conference table, with the hum of machines their only witness, he spoke. "We cannot stop here," he said quietly. "Whatever we saw, whatever touched us, it's knowledge. Terrible, yes, dangerous beyond anything we've known. But stopping now would be the greatest betrayal to ourselves, to science." Mira looked up from her mess of wires, jaw clenched. "You're not scared?" "Of course I am," Boush answered. "But curiosity is a hunger I can't ignore. If there's a world beyond our own, a place where logic and magic intertwine, then we must understand it. Otherwise, was all this worth it?" Gregor shook his head slowly. "There are limits even to genius," he muttered. "Some doors are closed for a reason." Fenric surprised them all by speaking, his voice low but resolute. "Genius is knowing which doors to open, and having the courage to step through when others will not." Anya's hand trembled as she traced a spiral in her notebook. "But what if it changes us? What if we can't come back?" A silence heavier than stone settled on them. Yet in that moment, as the storm raged overhead, something unspoken passed between them, a pact forged of shared madness and ambition. Boush's eyes met each of theirs in turn. "We'll go together," he promised. Preparations, the following days, became a blur of frantic invention and debate. Each member contributed their expertise to what might be their final project. Mira rewired her sensor helmet, adding crystalline relays etched with forbidden runes, a reckless fusion of technology and magic she would have once scorned. She built a frame around her body of articulated brass and steel, every joint oiled and tested by Boush himself. Gregor obsessively reinforced the portal ring, grafting new alloys to its frame until it looked more fortress than machine. He devised anchors, clockwork claws meant to keep their path stable should reality itself begin to slip. Anya scrawled endless equations on chalkboards and paper alike, seeking patterns in the symbols that haunted her dreams. Once gentle and dreamy, she now spoke in riddles, her mind ever half in the shadow of that other world. And Boush built armor for his mind as much as his body, lenses to shield his eyes from forbidden spectra, gloves woven with warded copper. At his heart, a single sliver of the strange crystal they had found near the portal, its energies bound within a gyroscopic cage. Fenric moved among them all, offering advice and silent support. The old mentor no longer tinkered with machines himself. Instead, he watched over his students with the quiet patience of one who has seen too many dreams turn to dust. The last night before their departure arrived heavy with anticipation and dread. They gathered in their laboratory for a final council. "I've plotted our return window," Mira said, showing the dial on her bracer. "If we don't come back in 3 hours, this will collapse the portal." She shot a look at Boush, equal parts challenge and fear. Gregor handed out small vials of shimmering blue liquid, an alchemical concoction meant to boost stamina and clarity of thought. "If you feel reality slipping, drink." Anya pressed thin talismans into each palm, charms she'd drawn from her haunted sketches. "For luck," she whispered. Fenric stood last by the door as they prepared to descend to the portal chamber beneath stone and earth. "You are scientists," he said softly, "but also pioneers. Remember, discovery should never cost your soul." They nodded, each word sinking deep as they made their way down spiraling stairs to what might be their destiny or their doom. The portal opens again. The portal ring stood silent and ominous at the heart of the deepest chamber, a serrated circle of metal and crystal humming faintly with latent power. Around it lay scars from their last experiment: scorched stone, shattered copper wiring, places where reality itself seemed thinner than air. Boush took his place at the main console. Mira checked gauges. Gregor adjusted stabilizers. Anya chanted softly in a tongue none recognized, but all felt echo inside their bones. "Ready?" Boush asked. One by one, they nodded, even Gregor's bravado faltering only for a heartbeat. Boush's hands danced across levers and keys. Mira synchronized Magitech relays. Gregor began the power-up sequence, his voice steady despite clammy palms. The portal shuddered alive, a corona of violet light blooming around its rim. The air thickened until every breath tasted electric. Patterns rippled across the ring's surface, fractal whorls, not quite geometry, not quite language. Anya stepped forward first, hand outstretched toward impossible horizons only she could see. She turned back, eyes shining silver and blue. "It's waiting," she whispered. Boush took a deep breath and stepped through. On the other side, the world beyond was impossible. For one agonizing moment, there was only dissolution, a sensation of being torn apart into numbers and reassembled as music and light. Then coherence snapped back like a whip. They stood together, not standing at all, but suspended in a space where up and down were suggestions rather than laws. The ground beneath was glassy darkness, shot with veins of starlight. Above, swirled ribbons of logic writ large across cosmic night. Structures hovered, impossible towers formed from equations, floating islands whose flora glowed with bioluminescent formulae. Rivers ran not water, but quicksilver memories. Mira's sensors sparked wildly, filling her visor with data no algorithm could parse. Gregor clung white-knuckled to a stabilizer pack, sweat freezing on brow despite a lack of wind or cold. Anya spun slowly in place, arms wide as if embracing some half-remembered melody drifting through this strange dimension. And Boush felt every hair on his body stand on end as he looked around, not with terror, but a wild delight that bordered on mania. "Look at it," he breathed, "a world made from thought itself, yet even fascination could not mask danger for long." Shapes moved in distant haze, luminous forms like living glyphs that watched but did not approach. Each movement sent ripples through reality itself, a warning or perhaps an invitation. Exploring the unthinkable, they set out cautiously, each step more guess than certainty, as gravity shifted with every thought. Mira mapped their trajectory via unstable vectors. Gregor trailed copper thread behind them, his makeshift lifeline quivering between worlds. "I can't get any meaningful readings," Mira grumbled, frustration mounting as her machines stuttered and spat gibberish onto glass plates. "Maybe meaning itself is different here," Anya murmured dreamily, trailing her fingers through a nearby pocket of floating glyphs that swirled away at her touch before reforming into new symbols. One's Boush recognized from her sketches back home. He reached out, a single finger brushing against one such symbol. For an instant, knowledge flooded him. Images of civilizations rising and falling in flashes of mathematics. Languages built from logic gates. Wars waged between beings of probability rather than flesh and bone. He recoiled, breathless, but changed. "We have to be careful what we touch," he warned. "This place, it answers questions we don't even know to ask." They pressed deeper into the landscape until they reached an archway, a bridge made from pure calculus, spanning an abyss filled with shifting reflections of their own faces, twisted by doubt and hope alike. Gregor stared into it and shivered violently. Mira steadied him without a word, her hand warm through layers of armor and device, gifts and warnings. As they crossed the bridge, one of the luminous beings approached, a shimmering figure composed of spinning rings and flickering equations for eyes. It did not speak in words, but in pulses, waves that resonated inside their minds. "Welcome, seekers. Beware." Images crashed through their consciousness, doors opening to darkness, threads snapping under strain, countless faces shouting soundlessly as they dissolved into raw information. Anya fell to her knees, clutching her head as symbols burned across her vision. Mira stumbled back. Gregor grunted in pain as if physically struck. Only Boush remained upright, jaw clenched hard against the deluge. He forced himself forward, addressing the being directly. "Why are you showing us this?" A pause. Then, "All knowledge has cost. Some doors lead only to ruin." Boush steeled himself. "How do we return? Choose to know or to live." He hesitated, but then helped Anya to her feet. "We're not ready yet," he whispered fiercely to his friends. "We take what we can, and we go." The being's form flickered, almost approvingly, and drifted away into cosmic shadow. The return. They stumbled back toward where they'd entered, Gregor following his copper thread desperately as Mira guided Anya's faltering steps. The world around them began to shudder, equations unraveling at their approach, colors bleeding into void, distant shapes gathering at the edges like predators scenting blood in water. With trembling hands, Mira activated her bracer, the recall sequence blinking red as energy funneled wildly into the dimensional anchor. "No!" she screamed, and together they hurled themselves toward the collapsing ring of violet light that marked their exit. For one dreadful moment, Boush looked back, and what he saw would haunt him forever. A storm on the horizon, black as pitch, rolling toward them on wheels of fire and logic and hunger without end. Then they were gone, tumbling through pain and roaring sensation until stone and smoke closed around them once more. Aftermath. They lay sprawled amid shattered equipment, chests heaving, faces pale, blood trickling from noses and ears alike. For long minutes, there was only ragged breathing, the shock of bodies pulled cruelly from abstraction back into flesh. Gregor was first to rouse, retching bile onto scorched tile before sobbing quietly into his hands. Mira sat up next, removing her helmet with shaking fingers as tears spilled unchecked down her cheeks. "We shouldn't have gone," she whispered hoarsely. "We shouldn't have seen." Anya rocked slowly, eyes fixed on nothing, as loud silence filled the chamber. Boush stood last, leaning heavily on a battered console for support, but resolve burning undimmed in his gaze despite everything lost inside him on the other side. "We survived," he croaked, and then repeated more forcefully, "We survived." But privately, he wondered at what cost, and what had followed them home in whisper or shadow or dream. Above them, the old clock tower chimed uncertainly, a broken song echoing through stone and time as genius pressed ever onward beneath haunted skies. Tinker, the clockwork genius. Part 7. The Shattered Circuit. The world seemed to tremble beneath Boush's boots as he stood, wavering, at the threshold that separated what was left of his team from the churning void beyond. The chamber's electric haze flickered, dim, uncertain. For a moment, all that filled the silence was labored breathing and the irregular pulse of warning lights from the battered recall console. He could still taste the metallic tang of fear on his tongue. Mira's voice was little more than a whimper. "We shouldn't have seen—" Gregor, silent now, hunched over his knees, eyes wide and unfocused. Anya's lips moved in frantic, wordless prayers as she rocked herself, the aftershocks of the alien vision dancing across her nerves. But Boush was already elsewhere. His mind, bruised and scorched, turned over and over the last images that had blazed through his consciousness. A cosmic storm, black and raging, riding toward them on wheels of logic and fire, doors opening onto endless darkness. The promise, no, the warning, that knowledge always exacts its price. It was not over. He knew it in his bones. A shuddering groan rattled through the foundation stones beneath their feet. The portal, a ring of twisted copper and pulsing violet, stabilized for a moment, then flickered, shrank, and began to crumble at its edges. "We have to leave," he said, more to himself than to the others. Yet when he looked up, they were already watching him, eyes desperate for hope, for answers. He drew a ragged breath, knuckles white on the edge of the scorched console. "We go together." But even as he spoke, Mira shook her head. I can't move," she gasped. "My legs—" Gregor staggered upright, swaying. "Let me help." He bent to lift Mira beneath her shoulders. Anya clung to Boush's sleeve as the floor vibrated with another ominous tremor. The chamber was collapsing. Equations scrawled in blue fire across the walls unraveled as if tugged by invisible hands. The very air buzzed with entropy. Boush threw a final glance at his makeshift exoskeleton, a crude suit of pistons and steel plating bolted together in anticipation of unknown dangers. He'd designed it for exploration. Now he saw it might serve another purpose entirely. He snapped open a compartment in its side and pulled out 2 slender vials, adrenaline serums, originally intended for emergencies on the far side of the portal. Without hesitation, he pressed one into Mira's hand and injected the other into Gregor's arm. "Move!" he commanded. The jolt was immediate. Mira lurched upright with a gasp, color returning to her cheeks. Gregor's eyes sharpened with sudden alertness. Anya seemed steadier now, clinging to her friends rather than dragging at them. "Stay together," Boush ordered, voice cold with focus. "Don't look back." They staggered through the winding corridors of their laboratory, the architecture itself stretched and warped by proximity to the portal's otherworldly energies. Doors opened where there had been walls. Staircases led downward into impossible darkness before looping back to familiar halls. At every turn, shadows writhed just out of reach, tendrils of that black storm from beyond the veil, probing for weakness, hunting their panic. Boush felt it gnawing at his thoughts, a hunger that pressed at the corners of his mind with cold logic and promise. "Open the door. Let us through." He gritted his teeth and pressed ahead. "We're almost there," he lied. "Just keep going." Behind them, Anya whimpered as a shadow licked across her ankle, a brief sensation of frigid emptiness that left her shuddering. "Boush!" Gregor barked suddenly. "Here, the service shaft." Sure enough, a narrow passage half hidden behind a bank of steam pipes. It should have led only to emergency lockers, but now it twisted impossibly upward, coiling toward moonlight. Mira gave a ragged laugh, half hysteria, half relief. Physics is having an off day. Boush managed a grim smile. Perhaps it's time we did too. They scrambled up, the exoskeleton whirring around Boush's limbs as he lifted Mira bodily through a shattered hatchway. Gregor pulled Anya with him, her feet barely touching the rung. As they emerged into cool night air atop what should have been the laboratory's roof, but now looked out over an unfamiliar landscape, black ridges and swirling clouds stitched with unnatural lightning, they realized something terrible. They had not truly returned. A distant bell tolled once, twice, from somewhere deeper in this broken world. The sound was warped and echoing like a memory refracted through glass. The sky overhead boiled with darkness, the same storm they'd glimpsed within the portal, now stretching across this entire realm. Before anyone could speak, a low growl rolled across the plateau, a chorus of metallic voices whispering nonsense equations and half-remembered screams. Gregor fell to his knees in exhaustion and terror. "This isn't real," he muttered. "We never left." Mira grabbed Boush's arm. "Do something! You built this whole nightmare. Get us out!" Boush stared at her, hollow-eyed. For the first time since childhood, he felt utterly helpless, a genius lost in his own unsolvable maze. But, and here was the difference between Boush and all those who came before, the thought did not break him. He gazed into the storm above, searching its depths for order amid chaos. He remembered the automaton whose tiny heart had once ticked beneath his hands, remembered every law he had ever bent, every certainty he'd overturned in pursuit of what lay beyond. He would not surrender here. "Listen!" he shouted over another peal of thunder. "This world is built on rules, even if those rules are broken now. If we can find a constant, a fixed point, we can anchor ourselves. We can fight our way back." Mira wiped rain from her brow, though it was not rain but something colder and more metallic that slicked her skin. "How? What do you mean?" Boush's mind raced through memories, equations carved into stone, diagrams scrawled across ancient books, conversations with elders about time and entropy. "The clock tower," he said sharply. "Every world I've ever known has one. It's our center. If we can reach it, maybe we can fix something here." Gregor spat blood onto the slick rooftop. "You're guessing." "I'm thinking," said Boush quietly. "And that's what got us this far." They made for the clock tower, its broken face shining ghostly silver in the stormlight. The way was treacherous. Shadows lunged from alleyways, resolving into ruined shapes that flickered between flesh and machine, nightmares spliced from memory and possibility. Once they passed a statue of Mira herself, eyes hollow, mouth open in a voiceless scream, before it crumbled into dust at their approach. The ground buckled beneath them, sometimes cobblestones, sometimes circuit boards etched with runes. The path was never the same twice. Twice shadows caught at their heels, Twice, Boush's exoskeleton flared with stored energy, burning them away with crackling arcs of violet light. Finally, they reached the base of the tower, its gears exposed and groaning beneath phantom winds. They climbed, each step an effort as gravity twisted underfoot and time seemed to reverse itself between heartbeats. At last, they reached the bell room, a ragged platform overlooking all creation, a place neither here nor there. The great pendulum hung frozen mid-swing. Glyphs blazed across its surface in languages none of them knew, but all somehow understood. Seekers, sinners, builders, breakers. At its base, the anchor point Boush had sought, they found what remained of themselves, reflections shimmering in fractured glass, memories flickering like candlelight. Boush approached first, reaching out with trembling hands to touch his own image. The storm roared above them, a maw opening wider with each passing second. "Tell me what to do," he begged, not sure if he was speaking to the clock tower or to whatever lingered inside himself after all they'd seen. The pendulum twitched, a jolt of energy arcing through Boush's exoskeleton and into his flesh. He saw everything at once, an infinity of worlds branching from every choice he'd ever made, endless variations of himself, some triumphant, some monstrous, all poised on the edge of annihilation or revelation. He saw, too, what must be done. "You have to let go," whispered Mira beside him. Her voice echoed with knowledge not her own. Gregor nodded grimly. "Whatever we brought back, it isn't meant for here." Anya sobbed softly, clinging to her friends as if they might hold her soul together by sheer force of will. Boush closed his eyes and let go. He released every calculation, every desperate thought for control, and allowed himself to become part of this place, broken yet whole, lost yet anchored by those who stood with him. The pendulum crashed downward, all sound swallowed in its wake as reality buckled outward from that single point of impact. The world went white. He awoke alone, cold stone pressed against his cheek. Above him, the ruined ceiling of what remained of his laboratory blinked in dawn's tentative light. The air reeked of burned oil and ozone, the acrid tang of failed magic mingled with scorched metal. Boush sat up slowly, limbs sluggish within his battered exoskeleton. Panic surged. Where were Mira, Gregor, Anya? He called their names, but silence answered him. Everywhere around him, devastation. The portal rig lay collapsed into itself, a blackened circle etched into flagstones now warped by forces not meant for mortal use. Instruments were shattered, glass crunched beneath his boots as he staggered to his feet. No sign remained of his friends, no trace but memories, raw and jagged, that threatened to break him anew. He stumbled outside, sunlight stinging eyes that had seen too much darkness, and beheld what else had changed. A black mist lingered at the village borders, unnatural, implacable. Birds no longer sang from twisted boughs. Even clockwork insects lay silent in dewy grass like toys, abandoned by careless children. Worse still, shadows moved within that fog, shapes too angular for nature, yet too animate for machines alone. Boush fell to his knees by the old sundial, the one where once he'd dreamed up wonders, and wept for everything lost. His team, his innocence, perhaps even his soul. But when he rose again, it was not as a boy or even a leader lost to grief. It was as something new, flesh fused to genius, sorrow hammered into resolve, a man bound forever by consequence to both science and sorrow alike. His exoskeleton whined softly with each movement, a reminder that even survival could wound as fiercely as defeat. He would search for answers, even if it meant venturing into darkness once more. For in that darkness, something waited still. Knowledge hungry for flesh, nightmares eager for form, hope kindled by tragedy into fire bright enough to challenge any void. And Boush, the clockwork genius, would meet them all, alone if need be, until all debts were paid and every lost friend avenged or redeemed beneath haunted skies. Above him, through cracked stone and shattered gears, the broken clock tower struggled valiantly to strike the hour once more, the sound thin but defiant against despair. Tinker, the clockwork genius. Part 8. The Exile's Toll. Dawn staggered over the reticulated plateau, weak and gray where once it had burst in jubilant gold. The clock tower, its stone scorched and gears mangled, struggled out a hollow clang that echoed across the ruined village. The chime, once the heartbeat of invention and hope, now sounded more like a warning bell. Boush stood in the center of the square. Where wildflowers once grew, only blackened stalks remained. The sundial at his feet was cracked through the center. His own hands, stained with soot and fresh blood, trembled in the chill air. The villagers gathered slowly, edging from twisted doorways and shattered workshops. No one spoke at first. Faces he knew since infancy, wrinkled with wisdom or bright with youthful promise, regarded him now with a wary, haunted suspicion. Even the old clockmaker, old Jury, would not quite meet Boush's eye. Boush said nothing. He had no words left, only memories of screams swallowed by the void and the terrible weight of knowing he had led friends into darkness from which only he had returned. From the crowd, a voice rose, soft, shaking, but resolute. "It was you," whispered Marga the apiarist, voice cracking. "You brought this upon us." Another broke in, voice bitter. "We saw the lights above your workshop, green fire, bolts of unnatural lightning. You tampered with things you had no right to touch." A low murmur spread through the square, a tide of anger and fear mingling. Footsteps rang on the stones as Elder Sava pushed his way forward, leaning hard on his cane. His white beard bristled, eyes sharp beneath furrowed brows. "Boush!" The old man's voice was heavy as iron. "You were our brightest hope, but look what you have done." He gestured to the broken automata, the guardians Boush himself had built, now lying in mangled heaps where they'd fallen to the black mist's corruption. Boush felt every word like a hammer blow, but his own voice was hollow when he tried to reply. "I only wanted to help. I thought if we could understand more, if we could bring something new." "You used magic," hissed a young tinker from behind her goggles. "You broke every code we hold sacred. How many did you lose in that portal, Boush? Where are Mira and Gregor? Where is Anya?" The names burned in his mind. He tried to find an answer, any rational defense, but there was nothing left but pain and guilt. Elder Sava's verdict fell like a guillotine. "You have unleashed darkness upon us. We cannot shelter you, not after this. There must be consequence, or we lose ourselves as a people." He faced the crowd. "All those in favor, speak now." A dozen voices rose, then more. "Away with him! Banishment! Let him take his monsters and his cursed machines into the wilds. Something inside Boush threatened to shadow entirely. He glimpsed faces twisted by fear, others streaked with tears, and knew that nothing he said could change what had been lost. Jury stepped forward at last, trembling with age and sorrow. "Take this," he said quietly, placing a battered satchel at Boush's feet. Inside were a few tools, some bread, a flask of water. "I don't believe you meant for this to happen, but what's done is done. Let time pass before you return, if ever." Boush reached for the satchel with numb fingers. He turned once more to face the villagers. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "If I could—" But he could not finish. He shouldered his burden, the weight of exile heavier than any tool, and set off down the shattered path that wound from the plateau's heart toward the cold, uncertain horizon. The journey into exile began with silence. Boush walked east, beyond the last ruined mills and stagnant ponds, where even frogs had fallen silent in mourning. The black mist clung at the edges of his vision. Twice he thought he saw Mira's face in its shadowy folds, eyes wide with betrayal or plea. His exoskeleton whined softly, its joints half melted by whatever forces had battered him during that final portal collapse. Still, it bore him onward, step after grinding step, after hours, or perhaps days, time lost meaning. He reached a rise overlooking all he had left behind. The village was already fading into distance and haze. Smoke curled from collapsed rooftops like fingers beckoning him home or warning him away forever. He sat there until dusk bled into starlight. When hunger forced him to move again, Boush wandered into a hollowed forest where even moonlight seemed reluctant to dwell. He found shelter beneath a leaning oak whose branches drooped like grieving arms. There he wept, not the quick tears of anger or shock, but slow tears that wrung themselves from marrow and soul alike. He whispered his friends' names into the roots and earth. Mira, Gregor, Anya. He remembered Mira's laughter as she balanced on fence posts, sketching blueprints in the air with her fingertips. Gregor's booming laugh whenever an experiment exploded. Anya's gentle corrections as she smoothed equations no one else could parse. Boush pressed his forehead against cold bark and let himself break again. When sleep found him at last, it brought only fractured dreams. 1,000 ticking clocks whose hands spun backward, cogs chewing through flesh instead of time. Shadows with faces he almost knew, reaching for him through crawling fog. Machines bristling with runes that bled light not of this world. He woke, gasping in the dark, the chill air thick with regret. The days blurred together. He scavenged wild roots and drank from slow-moving streams that tasted faintly of iron and grief. His exoskeleton grew sluggish. Some nights it seized up entirely and left him shivering, until dawn warmed battered servos back to life. He did not repair it. He did not dare create anything new. Not yet. Not after what had happened. Sometimes anger threatened to flare, a hot spark within his chest, but shame always followed close behind. He replayed every argument, every warning he'd ignored from wiser voices. You cannot blend magic and science safely. There are forces you do not understand. And yet, beneath all that pain, some stubborn ember survived, a question he could not extinguish. If we never risked, never tried, would we ever move forward? But each time that hope flickered up, he remembered Mira's last glance and let guilt drive it back down again. One wet morning, clouds hanging low and sullen, Boush stumbled upon something strange among tangled roots, a relic half buried in dirt and moss. It was one of his old automata, a clockwork insect, wing cracked but core still faintly pulsing blue within its brass shell. Boush knelt beside it, running trembling fingers over tarnished gears. The villagers must have thrown it away after his exile, a symbol of all they wished to forget. He felt a surge of grief so powerful it nearly sent him reeling. Yet, as he cradled the broken thing in his palm, another feeling stirred, a sense of responsibility for this machine and all others touched by his hand. If darkness had entered their world through his hubris, then perhaps part of him remained bound to mend what he had broken. But first came survival and learning how to forgive himself. The next days brought rain that muddied every trail and drove Boush to hollow out crude shelters among roots or rocks. He grew thin, his hands chapped and bled from cold or from wrestling stubborn bits of metal into order as he toyed with repairs by firelight. Each night he forced himself to remember what had gone wrong, not just in science or magic, but in trust, how pride had blinded him to doubt, how desperation for answers had deafened him to pleas for caution. But sometimes, when wind moaned through branches or foxfire glimmered at forest edge, he thought he heard voices on the air, Mira calling for patience, Gregor urging one more experiment, Anya reminding him that humility must walk beside genius, lest both perish together. Those memories became guideposts, reminders not only of failure, but of what might still be redeemed if ever he found courage anew. One evening, as the sky fractured between storm and stars, Boush found himself staring up at distant constellations, trying to map their patterns as if answers might be written there instead of within himself. A twig snapped behind him, a sound far too deliberate for any wild animal. He spun around, with more instinct than hope, heart pounding faster than any gear wheel could turn. Out of darkness stepped Elder Sava's grandson, Renat, a boy on the cusp of manhood who'd once idolized Boush as much for his kindness as for inventions. Renat regarded him warily but without malice. "I brought you this," he said softly, holding out a lantern etched with protective glyphs, the village's last gift before sealing its borders against further harm. "Grandfather says none should die alone." Boush stared at the lantern in disbelief. "They sent you?" Renat shook his head. "They're afraid." His eyes glistened with something like defiance or hope barely stifled by fear. "But I remember what you did for us before, all those times you fixed things no one else could." The silence between them stretched thin as wire drawn too tightly. Then Renat knelt beside Boush. "What really happened?" he whispered. Boush found himself telling it at last, the story pouring out in fits and starts, the hunger for knowledge, the lure of ancient runes, Mira's warnings, Gregor's faith, Anya's sacrifice, how science and magic had fused then fractured beneath their hands, how darkness had come rushing in like water through cracked glass. When he finished, Renat was silent for a long time. Finally, "Will you go back?" the boy asked quietly. Boush looked away, to where dawn was trying once more to climb above broken trees and ashes far behind them. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, but I know I must find a way to set things right, or at least try, even if it means never seeing home again. Renat pressed the lantern into Boush's hands. Its glow sparked warm against cold fingers. "Then go farther," Renat said fiercely. "Go until you find those answers, or until you become someone who can." Before Boush could reply, the boy was gone, vanished among tangled branches like hope, slipping between dreams and daylight. Alone again, but less empty now, Boush studied the lantern's light flickering over brass and bone. He wound his automaton carefully, a single click sparking blue within its chest, and watched it crawl uncertainly across his palm before settling by his side as if offering silent company against despair. For the first time since exile began, Boush let himself wonder if perhaps even now something good might grow from ruin if he carried pain wisely, rather than letting it consume him whole. But for that spark to kindle into fire would require more than regret or sorrow. It would demand invention, not just in gears and wires, but within himself. Compassion forged from loss. Resolve hammered out upon anvil of honest reckoning. Courage soldered joint by aching joint, until purpose shone through every scarred surface anew. The wind shifted, the scent of ozone faint upon its breath, and somewhere deep within the black mist curling far behind him, something ancient stirred. Neither machine nor magic, but some fusion older than both, and hungry still for form and meaning. Boush rose beneath trembling stars, lantern held high, and took another step into exile's unknown night, not as engineer or pariah alone, but as something new, a mind tempered by failure, a heart armored in sorrow, and a spirit haunted by hope that even darkness can be measured, and every exile may yet find its way home, if only through fire, loss, ingenious enough to dream beyond despair. Far behind him on the plateau, the broken clock tower struck midnight, a single note echoing through ruin and regret alike. Fragile, yet defiant. Mourning, yet unbroken entirely.